Hello, everybody. Welcome to your free GMAT prep hour. It is October 6th, 2020. I will be your host. My name is Reed Arnold. For those of you that are here live, welcome. For those of you that are watching later on, welcome as well. If you're looking for more free prep options, please note you can always try one of our classes for free. The first of any course session is available to you. Find one that fits your schedule. Find a teacher you're curious about, read our bios online, check our reviews, and go see what that class is about. If it's something that jives with you, you can sign up for the full course. Even if you don't tell my managers I told you this. It's a free class, and quite frankly, we talk about some really important stuff in class one, so it's kind of a win-win. We talk about data sufficiency, we talk about some big habits and strategies to get through data sufficiency questions, we talk about sentence correction, some of the biggest stuff in sentence correction, and we talk about what the GMAT is. So it's 11% of our $1,600 product for free. So find one that fits your schedule, sign up, and go check that out. If you are a self-studier, you can try a sample of our Interact course. That's our video course. Really neat product, has won several awards. Adapts to you as you take the class, basically. It's a video course. It asks questions. If you get a question right, it'll actually shift you to a harder question. If you get a question wrong, it'll shift you to a more specific explanation and give you an easier question to practice based on that mistake you made. So it's just a really interesting take on a video course, much more interactive than most video courses you're probably used to. So welcome. Today, our lesson is on pre-thinking, the work before you work. Pre-thinking is a habit that people who have mastered this test really implement. A lot of students and GMAT novices will see a question and they kind of just jump in. They think that the test is a test of doing stuff. And really, this is a reasoning test. It's an executive reasoning test, and that involves thinking. And there are certain questions where instead of jumping in and well, that's some questions, frankly, most questions, you will be rewarded if you stop and think about what you might do or about what might be possible, rather than just jump in and start doing math or reading thoughtlessly or reading, just getting through words top to bottom, left to right. Thinking first, front loading some of the thoughts you'll have can be a really useful strategy. It can actually make a lot of the questions easier than if you immediately get to work in the hope that, or in the fear that you'll run out of time. Okay, so we're going to talk about pre-thinking specifically today in the context of data sufficiency, critical reasoning, and if we have time, reading comprehension. Those are the question types that most fit the kind of pre-thinking I'm talking about, but just know that you can do pre-thinking on virtually any question type. But those are the three that we're going to focus on today. Okay, so let's just kind of jump right in and talk about what I mean by this. So this right here is a data sufficiency question. And I have hidden the statements, and I'm going to do this a lot today. I'm just going to show you the question because the point is, what can we think about pertaining to the question before we actually do the question and fill in the blanks that the rest of the question will fill. Just take 30 seconds, a minute, and just think about this situation in front of you. Go ahead and type in the chat if you've thought of anything, if there's anything about this question that jumps out at you, anything you're curious about. Go ahead and type what you're finding or noticing. Jaydeep says, is PS parallel to QR? Well, I'd say so. Does look like these lines are parallel. Jaydeep is maybe curious, hold up, is PQ parallel to SR? That's a different question. Okay, good. Dom is wondering, is X greater than Y? It's an interesting thought. Okay, Reen is wondering if the bigger angle will have the shorter line. It does. It is a data sufficiency question, Pooja. Zach says, if X and Y were equal, we might be able to figure something out. That's a good thought as well. Okay, good. So a lot of good thoughts coming in here. Okay. So let's talk about this. This is a data sufficiency question. And in a data sufficiency question, before you go to the statements, there's pretty much 4 things you want to do every time. Step 1 is specify what is given. Step 2 is specify what is asked. Step 3 is categorize the question. Is it a value or a yes, no? And step 4 is rephrase and investigate. For those of you that don't know what data sufficiency is, I'll explain here shortly. Excuse me. But you don't even need to know to do the work we're doing right now. And it's this step 4 that we're going to focus on today. The rephrase investigate phase. This is what to do before going to the DS statements. Okay. And people tend to shortchange step 4. And it's because in some data sufficiency question, there's really no rephrasing or investigating that can be done, right? The question, something like, is X even? There's not much rephrase. I mean, I guess you could rephrase it as like, is X odd? You could wonder about that, but like, there's really not much you can do with that. There's not much investigating to be done. But a lot of data sufficiency questions, the skill and the main work is actually in this phase. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. Okay, so we're given that these lines PS and QR are parallel. We know that X and Y are less than 90. Okay, so these angles here are acute. And we want to know, is PQ less than SR? Well, here are some things you can think about before going to the statements in data sufficiency. What circumstances would yield which answer? I should maybe say which answers. Or, and sometimes these are kind of the same thought, but or, if the answer was something, whatever that answer is you're thinking about, what would be true? Okay. And so I saw some people talk about, you know, is PQ, I think it was JD said, is PQ parallel to SR? Right? Because if PQ is parallel to SR, then they will be equal. Okay, that would be a parallelogram. A lot of people asked, is X greater than Y? That's because if X is greater than Y, SR will be greater than PQ. If you need to visualize that, just imagine a Y that's very small and an X that's very big. Right? This angle is much bigger than this angle. And that smaller Y leads to a much longer line, quite clearly, than that angle. Almost a right angle here at X. Okay. Similarly, and this can yield to similar thoughts here, if PQ is less than SR, then X is going to be greater than Y. If PQ equals SR, then X is going to be equal to Y. If PQ is more than SR, Y will be greater than X. And what you start to notice is that while this question is asking about PQ and SR, it's really asking, is X greater than Y? Whoever said this rephrase, that's exactly right. Because answering this question answers the question that's actually asked. And you find that by being curious about the possible outcomes of the question before you've even really tried to answer the question. You're just wondering what could be the case here? What is possible in this world? Okay. And these kinds of thoughts here, okay, well, what circumstances yield to which answers? Or if that answer is true, what else would have to be true? Okay. Those can be helpful thoughts in working through a data sufficiency question. Someone asks, how do you have time to do this on the exam? Well, I'm not saying you have to do all of this that we've done here. Okay, I'm not saying you have to have every thought that we've laid out in this particular case. But having some of the thoughts, and notice this, a lot of these thoughts are actually very similar, but having some of the thoughts will put you in the right ballpark to answer the question that is asked, and you will start noticing opportunities to make inferences based on the rules of the GMAT test. The GMAT is a standardized test. They use the same rules over and over again in subtly reformulated questions, but it's the same stuff. Otherwise, it's not standard, and that's not fair. And so you start to recognize that when a certain situation pops up, you want to think about certain rules. So here, this thing looks like a parallelogram. We have angles. I think that's probably why Jaideep thought about, oh, well, what if the two are parallel? Then I would know that these are equal. That's just a rule of parallelograms. Okay. Someone else said, well, what if X is bigger? Well, that means that PQ would be shorter. And so you use your familiarity, and it takes practice to get that familiarity, but you use the familiarity to know what certain things to consider. And you investigate. You kind of test that possibility. Well, what if Y is really small and X is almost 90 degrees? And you can draw the shape. That curiosity can yield insight. So with those thoughts, when you go to the statements, and statement 1 tells you X is greater than Y, well, we've already done the work. We already have realized the question is really asking, is X greater than Y? Because if X is greater than Y, then PQ is less than SR. And so I answer the question. Statement 2 tells me X plus Y is 90. Is X 50 and Y 40? Or is X 30 and Y 60? I don't know which one is bigger. And so that would be insufficient. The answer here would be A. And for those of you that don't know what data sufficiency is, I won't spend too much time on it today because it's not the purpose of this lesson. Make sure you master it though, because it is a very important and common GMAT question type. What you're trying to say is what combination of those two statements answers the question that is asked. And the answer choices are always, they're more filled out than this, they're more specific than this, but this is the way I remember them. They're always the same. The statement 1 alone is enough. Statement 2 alone is enough. Together, we have enough information. Each on their own is enough information, or there's not enough to answer. I can't answer the question. So in this particular situation, knowing X is greater than Y is enough to answer the question. So I know the answer is A. Okay. So let's try another one here. Take a minute to ponder this question here. See some good thoughts coming in. Good, Kimberly. Good, Rena. Good, Jaydeep. Pretty good, Dom. You might want to be a little bit more specific. It's not just how many cars are full, but which cars. So those of you that have come up with some version of are the first four cars full? Anyone care to explain how they found that rephrase? What line of reasoning got them to ask this particular question? So Harris, you noticed 32 people and 8 seats in each car, and you just figured, well, 32 divided by 8 is 4. So that'd be 4 full cars. That's pretty good. Just notice the numbers, that kind of connection there. I would say the best, other than that, the best way to find this situation is to say, if the answer is no, right? If there's not a person in the back car, then the 32 people must be in the first 4 cars. And if the 32 people are in the first 4 cars, each car must be full because 32 divided by 4 is 8. 32 people in 4 cars, that's 8 people a car. That's every seat being full. And so I was very close today to doing and it kind of spiraled into 2 lessons at one point, and I decided to condense it back into 1. But I almost really got into like the formal logic of what's lurking under the GMAT and many GMAT questions. But what we have right here is if the back car is empty, that means then each car is full. And there's a rule of formal logic where we can then say if each other car, is not full, then the back seat or the back car is not empty. This is a fairly common logical game that shows up on the GMAT. I might do a full lesson on it on one of these free GMAT prep hours. But if P then Q means if not Q, then not P. So if I want to know if there's a person in the back seat, I really want to know, are the other 4 cars full? Okay. And you can get that by asking these other questions. I just think this is the most direct line of reasoning. This is the fastest way to see it. Consider the no answer, what would have to be true in that case? If the answer is no, every car is full. Okay, then you go to the statements here with the thought of, is every other car full? And in so many words, these both tell us the other cars are not full. Right? If the first car has more riders, then we know the second car is not full. So someone is in the back car. If the 4th car, someone is sitting in next to an empty seat, then the 4th car is not full. So someone is in the back car. But if you just jump right from the question into those statements seem pretty vague and meaningless, and they don't, like, what do those have to do with the back car? I don't care how many riders are in the first car. I don't care how many riders are in the second car or the 4th car. It seems totally disconnected. But if you've really thought about the situation up front and thought about the possibilities up front, you'll realize that those are very pertinent pieces of information. The answer to this question is D. Each statement on its own is sufficient. Okay. Any questions I can answer for this problem here. Or about this topic in general, this rephrasing, investigating phase before going to the statements. Good question. Can you do this with value questions? You certainly can. I'd have to think about an example. It's less common. Let me see if I can cook one up. I'll see if I can find one in my memory as we're still working. But I do think that there are value questions where you can pre-think for sure. I have a question, does pre-thinking always work here? When you say here, what do you mean? Like in this type of question or in this particular question? What do you mean by here? Actually, here's a value question. I have one on the list. I have it's a specific kind of value questions, but I do have a value question we can do here in a moment. Pre-thinking doesn't always work because sometimes the question, there's not much pre-thinking to be done. It's a pretty dull, uninvestigatable question. But usually it's worth checking to see if you can do some pre-thinking. So here's a question that is technically a value question. It's not a calculation-heavy value question, but it is technically a value question. And I do think there's some pre-thinking to be done here. So I'll give you all a minute or so. Let's see what pre-thinking we can find. Sorry, gang, just had a internet glitch. I hope we didn't lose. We're still recording, it looks like. Pretty fast. My Wi-Fi dropped and got back on. Hopefully y'all can see and hear me. We're still good to go. Someone says the moment you stared at your watch for more than a second, I knew something was off. Yeah, my internet must have totally putzed. Zoom has been acting very funky today. I don't know if anyone else has had any issues with it, but I certainly have. Okay, so let's talk about this question. That should be enough time to consider. If p is a positive odd integer, what is the remainder when p is divided by 4? What pre-thinking did we find for this particular question? Okay, good, Sogan. So the okay. So is the remainder 1 or is it 3? Yeah, someone says, is it a multiple of 4? But I know it's not a multiple of 4 because it's an odd integer. For those of you that watch the Twitch, the GMAT video, I missed this question because I forgot that this had to be an odd integer. It's the kind of thing you want to write down in nice big letters so you don't forget. P is odd. And if I had done better rephrasing, I would have written this down too. Is the remainder 1 or 3? Why is that the question? Well, when I divide by 4, the possible remainders are 0, 1, 2, and 3. I can't have remainder 5 when I divide by 4. The remainders are the leftover when I divide. and the leftover can't be more than what I'm dividing by, because then what I'm dividing by fits into the leftover, so that wouldn't work. Okay. 4 doesn't fit into 3, 2, 1, or 0, so those can be the leftovers here. Okay, so this is a pretty good place to be. Is the remainder 1 or 3? Okay. If you wanted to be more specific, like when do you get which outcome, right? What circumstances yield to which outcome? Well, if P is 1 more than a multiple of 4, remainder is going to be 1. If P is 3 more than a multiple of 4, remainder will be 3. You can even be a little bit more specific about that, though. When is a number 3 more than a multiple of 4? Well, if it's 1 more than a multiple of 2, but not 4. Multiples of 4 come every 4 numbers, and in between those, the even numbers like 2 and 6 and 10, they're even, but they're not multiples of 4. And the numbers after that, like 3 and 7 and 11, those have remainder 3. If it comes after 4, like 5 or 9, it's going to have a remainder 1. And so we're wondering, okay, since we are an odd number, which one are we? Are we 1 after a multiple of 4, or are we 1 after a multiple of 2? That's not a multiple of 4. Okay. Do you have to do this to get this question right? Probably not. This is, you don't always have to investigate rephrase. Sometimes it's possible to get a question right without it, but the more you've habituated it, the more likely you are to catch questions where you do need to do it. Okay. And these statements in particular seem to be a little bit different from the rephrase we just did, but if you keep it in mind, you can draw the inferences here. So take a look at these two statements. These two statements. I've taught a lot today. I'm getting delirious. Take a look at these two statements and compare them to that question that's actually being asked. Good as are. If P is divided by 8, the remainder is 5. That means P is 5 more than a multiple of 8. Multiples of 8 are multiples of 4. So 4 more than a multiple of 4 is also a multiple of 4. Right, so I have like this multiple of 8, 8k, some integer k, plus 5. Well, that's 8k plus 4 plus 1. Here's a multiple of 4, and I'm 1 more than that, so I have a remainder of 1. That's what statement 1 tells me. Statement 2, the sum of squares of two positive integers. I do not know the rule, and I would not expect you to know the rule. Oh, this is the rule. The odd square, or the odd sum of two perfect squares, must be 1 more than a multiple of 4. That is ultimately true. I did not know that until today when I was working on this question for this problem. I would not expect you to know that. But if you test cases, yeah, Rena, that's exactly right. If you test cases, you're gonna say, okay, well, it has to be odd. That's the thing I forgot when I did this on the actual test. If I have like 3 squared plus 4 squared, because I have to have an odd plus an even to end up at an odd, that's gonna be 9 plus 16, that's 25. That's remainder 1. That's 1 more than a multiple of 4. If I have 1 squared plus 2 squared, that equals 5. That's remainder 1 when I divide by 4. And at this point, I'm starting to get suspicious because I tested 2 pretty different cases, but you could do one more. You could do like 5 squared plus 8 squared. That's going to equal 25 plus 64. That's going to equal 89. That has remainder 1 when I divide by 4. So it's like, okay, this is remainder 1. This is 1 more than a multiple of 4. Okay. Now, if you were home and you were studying, you might be curious and try to figure out, why is this true? Why do these cases all have remainder 1 when there's a multiple of 4? Or when you divide by 4 after you've added an odd perfect square plus an even perfect square. And that kind of curiosity can benefit you. It can improve your quantitative skills. But for the purpose of answering the question, this is plenty. So it's a strange value question, but it is technically a value question. You are looking for a value, a number. But it does kind of turn into a binary, right? Ultimately, it turns into, is the remainder 1 or is it 3? There's really only 2 options. That's not immediately clear. That's part of the value of rephrasing this value question, is that, oh wait, it's actually not even a value question, really. It's a yes/no question in disguise. Okay. Let's see, we've got 20 minutes left. No, not that question. Let's do this question. This is another one from the Twitch the GMAT, but it's a really good example of rephrasing. It's a tough question. So I'm going to give you here a minute or so to really think about what the heck to think about on this question. Good. I have some good answers coming in here in the chat. This is a hard question. But just to emphasize the importance of rephrasing, if you watch the Twitch the GMAT video where I take the quant section, this question pops up in the last 6 minutes, I think. It was one of the last questions I saw. So I'm running out of time. Nonetheless, I still pre-thought. I spent a good minute and a half off the statements, even though I was running out of time. You can watch it, okay? And by doing so, I was able to get this question right, where I think if I didn't pre-think, I would have been hopeless. Pre-thinking is what this question is about. And I see some people are seeing what thoughts we really can have here and what question is really being asked. And so I think this particular version of this question is very hard. Like, if the answer is yes, what else must be true? I don't know. I have no idea. If the answer is no, what else must be true? I don't know. I have no idea. It's very hard to formulate from this version of the pre-thinking. This one is more interesting here. What circumstances yield what outcome? And you can think about actual numbers, or you can just kind of think about placement on a line. That's what I did on the test, really, is actually like visualize the number line. I think that's helpful. But for the sake of here, let's just think about like a very boring case where x is 10 and y is 8. And it's like, is 10 minus 8 greater than the absolute value of 10 minus the absolute value of 8? And the answer is clearly no, because this just tells me, is 2 greater than 2? And so what that kind of tells me is like, well, okay, hold up. If I'm in kind of the boring situation where x is greater than y, then, and they're both positive, then the answer to this question is going to be dull. It would be, the answer would be yes if y were over here, though. Because if y was over here, the absolute value of x minus y, this would be a negative number. And this number, whatever it is going to be a positive number. So that would be a yes case. If y is greater than x and they're both positive, that would be a yes case. Like if I had 8 minus 10, if I flip those numbers. Yeah, that's going to be greater than the absolute value of 8 minus the absolute value of 10 for sure. But I start wondering about what other situations would yield this outcome, would yield a yes answer. I might wonder about, okay, what if they're both negative? But same issue, if y is further away from 0, then this number on the right is going to be negative and this number is going to be positive. So really, one version of this question that I'm curious about is y further away from 0 than x? Because if it is, the answer to this question is yes. If y is further from 0, the answer to this question is going to be yes. But then I might wonder, what if they're on different sides of 0? What if x is positive and y is negative? Well, then I'm going to have a positive minus a negative. That's going to make this number even bigger. And then I have an absolute value of a positive minus the absolute value of a positive of a negative, but it becomes positive. Well, that makes this number smaller. And so if they're on opposite sides, it seems like maybe the answer is going to be yes. And the same thing if I flip it, if it's negative. If x is negative and y is positive, if I subtract that, that gets further away from 0. And so what this question becomes is y further away from 0, or are x and y, or do x and y have opposite signs? These are the situations that yield to a yes answer. Okay, if they're on the same, if they're both positive and y is closer to 0, the answer is going to be no. If they're same sign and y is closer to 0, the answer is going to be no. Those are the circumstances. Okay, and I'm telling you, you can watch me do it. I spend a minute and a half figuring that out, figuring out that this is the question to ask. And then when you go to the statements, you find yourself in a much nicer situation. x, y is negative, then they have opposite signs. If y is less than x, okay, is y less than x and they're both positive? Or is y negative and x positive? This does not tell us enough information. Because these are the questions I'm really curious about. And statement 1 doesn't tell me. Both are possible. They could have opposite signs, or they could have the same sign and y be closer to 0. Okay. And so the answer to this question is B. If I know x times y is negative, I know that x and y have opposite signs. And I've already realized that if they have opposite signs, the answer to the question is yes. Now, could you theoretically do this question without rephrasing and like test cases? And yeah, you could. I suspect it would be very difficult. So in data sufficiency, keep those questions in mind. And again, sometimes you can't rephrase and there's not much to really investigate, but ponder ahead of time what would cause certain answers to the question, or what would certain answers to the question necessitate, meaning what would they force to be true? Because if you know the answer choice would mean something, right? If a yes answer meant, this is not the case here, like if a yes answer meant x is negative and x is not negative, then I know the answer is no. Rena, yeah, I didn't do any, well, actually, let's do, we're not going to do critical reasoning if we do the word problem, but there are word problems where you can rephrase. It just depends on what the question is. A lot of word problems have rephrasing. Well, I'll pull this one up and have you think about it for 2 seconds here. This is kind of a word problem. Go ahead and spend 2 minutes and think about how you could rephrase this question. I've left some of the statements, not the whole statements, but I've left some of the statement as a hint about how you might rephrase. All right, so I have, this is a more mechanical rephrase, but it is a word problem where the rephrase can very much help you. There are a few different ways to go about it. But so Gond is asking, was this guy's speed, was Carlos's speed more than 12 miles an hour? And that's a pretty good one, Sagan, but I think if you look at the answer choices, you probably want to rephrase that even further. And how did Sagan get is the speed greater than 12 miles an hour? Well, we have distance equals rate times 1/2 time, 1/2 an hour. And we're wondering if the distance is greater than 6 miles. And so it's like, okay, well, let's think about it. If the distance is greater than 6 miles, that's going to equal a rate times 1/2. And if I multiply by 2, I'm going to have a distance greater than, or I'm sorry, a rate greater than 12 miles an hour. That's if I just multiply the whole thing by 2. And so you can rephrase this question as, is Carlos's speed greater than 12 miles per hour? But if you look at the answer choice, or the statements, you see that this is in feet per second. And so you might want to think about, okay, well, hold up, I got to actually think about this miles per hour in feet per second. And what might you do there? Well, 12 miles an hour. Well, okay, I know that I have 5,280 feet in a mile. So that'll cancel out my miles. And I know I have 3,600 seconds per hour, and that's going to cancel out the hours. And so what I'm left with is the rate greater than 12 times 5,280 over 3,600? And I can hear you all saying, like, Reed, eat dog, because that's not going to work. I had to censor myself there. Sometimes I forget I'm a professional. But we can simplify this further, and if we're thoughtful about it, it's really not that bad. We can cancel out a 0. And then 12 over 360 is actually not so bad here. We can cancel that and turn it into 30. And so the question becomes, okay, is the rate more than 528 over 30? And if I'm thoughtful about 528 over 30, that's going to be 510 over 30 plus 18 over 30. Why 510? Because that's 17. It's 51 over 3 plus a little bit more than a half, 18 over 30. If I divide by 6, it's going to be 3/5. So 17 plus 0.6. So really the question is the rate more than 17.6 feet per second? And then if I look at the answer choice, or the statements, I keep saying answer choice, I look at the statements, and I want to know, is the rate more than 17.6 feet per second? Well, this tells me it's more than 16, but is it more than 17.6? I don't know. This tells me it's less than 18, but is it more than 17.6? I don't know. I know it's between 16 and 18, but is it more than 17.6? I don't know. At that point, the reasoning is really fast. I know it's not enough. That 17.6 is in between these endpoints. And all that heinous, if you're, again, practice arithmetic. One of my my favorite teacher, one of my favorite teachers, he's since left the company, I'm afraid. Patrick, if you ever watch this, miss you, bud. But he always said arithmetic is the tide that lifts all boats. And I think that's true. If you get fast and efficient with arithmetic, it can really help your quant. Because there are tricks that make it much easier than it first looks, right? This first math probably made you want to throw up, I understand. This question used to make me want to throw up until I really practiced arithmetic tricks. And you get to a pretty straightforward question. Okay. So you can do this on word problems, and there are other versions of this kind of thing. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left or so. I do want to make sure we do a verbal. Okay, because I do want to do a critical. Yeah, so JDP said, can we do over critical reasoning, pre-thinking? Yeah, I do want to talk about that. And I think at some point I want to do a full lesson on like critical reasoning and what it is. But I do want to show you all an example of what pre-thinking looks like on a critical reasoning argument. That one is fine. I think I want to do this one. Kind of hard to see that. Can you all see that, those words? That's too small. Can't really zoom in, I'm afraid. Okay, good, I'm glad. Perfect, okay, so take a minute or so, minute and a half, read this argument, and we'll talk about what you can think about when you read a critical reasoning argument like this. Because notice I have no answer choices. The point is not to answer the question right now. All right, so let's talk about what you could, I assume that's enough time to have read and kind of thought about this. So let's lay out what kind of pre-thinking there is to do here. Okay, if you were, this is the kind of thing where if you were just waiting for answer choices, right, you're not probably engaged in the way the GMAT is going to reward. Okay, so one thing you always want to do is lay out the actual structure of this argument here. The conclusion here, the point, it's the last sentence there, Kitchen can license its brand without endangering other revenues. Why does this author seem to think Kitchen can do that? Okay, well, usually, like sometimes, licensing is bad because bad products hurt brand, hurt reputation, lowers circulation, and advertising. Right, so if it's a bad product, it can hurt our circulation, hurt our advertising. People don't pay us for advertising anymore. Kitchen, magazine, you're screwed. You blew it. Okay, but experts have said this cookware is the best, or is, I shouldn't say the best, but it's better than other products in Kitchen magazine. Okay, so it's like, hey, don't worry about it. You're already talking about stuff in your magazine, and this stuff is better than that stuff. So your brand is totally safe. So therefore, you can license your these products without hurting your revenues. There are 3 questions that are key to critical reasoning. And again, this is the thing I want to do a full video on someday, but this is like the key things to wonder. What would it mean for this specific conclusion to be false or to be wrong? How could that happen even though the premises are true? And 3, what assumptions then save the argument? This is how you find assumptions. This is what critical reasoning is. And you do this all before going to the answer choices, because if you do good reasoning here, the answer choices will fit into that world you're considering. So what would it mean for this conclusion to be false? Well, it turns out that doing this actually does hurt the revenues, right? So false if licensing hurts revenues. Well, how could licensing hurt the revenues? This is the question we want to ask now. How could licensing hurt the revenues even though the product is so good? So Gond has a good thought here. What if we license this product and all the people who buy advertisements from our magazine is like, Kitchen, whoa, I've been paying you money to advertise my product, but you have a product now. You are licensing a product. I don't want to advertise in your magazine when you are now basically my direct competitor. So Kimberly's wondering, like, just because it's a good product relative to others doesn't mean it's actually good. In this particular case, well, for one, no, we'll do the first thing. In this particular case, since it's better than what the magazine already talks about, presumably sometimes in good terms, then it must be good enough for Kitchen Magazine, right? Like, if Kitchen Magazine is okay with these other products, it's going to be okay with a product that's even better. But the bigger point I would make, Kimberly, is like, don't doubt. You're trying to say like, maybe it's not a good product. And that's not a bad thought in general, but on the GMAT, it's just not an interesting thought. And what I mean by interesting, it's like it's more interesting if it's a good product, but the conclusion is still false. In the real world, we try to chip at premises all the time. And that's important to do. Like, hold up, your premise is false, right? The thing you think is true is actually not true. On the GMAT, what we're going to do is, I believe your premise, but I doubt your conclusion. Yeah, Rena, I've said this before in other videos, but don't attack the premise. I don't really want to think about the world where the product is actually crap. You know, it's like, haha, got you. We said it might be good, but it's not. That's not really the game. What the GMAT does is like, no, it's a good product, but kitchens still maybe shouldn't do this because it might still hurt their revenues. And so far, this is the best thought I have. And I'm going to, for the sake of time, I think I'm going to call it, because that is the thought, right? What if other advertisers, for some reason, don't like this play? If our other advertisers get mad and pull their advertising, then we might hurt our revenues by licensing our name for this particular product. I must assume that that won't happen. I must assume that the other companies will keep paying us advertising and will not be mad for us directly supporting a competitor of theirs. And if you go to your answer choices here, makers of cookware will not find kitchen less attractive, a less attractive advertising vehicle because the name is associated with a competitor product. So Gon, have you done this question before, just out of curiosity? So Gon might be gone. That's the kind of thing where you might think like, oh, he had to have done this question before, but he very well might not have. This kind of, if you do good critical reasoning, this kind of thing happens quite a bit. You put yourself right into the crux of the matter. JD, if I don't, like, you're asking, does licensing as a strategy to generate added revenues, is that an example of attacking the premise? I don't see why that thought is relevant here. Yeah, so Sagan says he's finishing his EBA. He's used to thinking this way. Yeah, he hasn't seen this question before. And this is, I noticed you say you're finishing your MBA. I want to talk to you after this course is over, why you're here. If you're taking your MBA, I'm just curious about, you're just a GMAT fan, or do you want to take it again for some other reason? But this is kind of a business. This one actually does deal with business, and for a business school test, a lot of these questions don't actually deal with business, but this is kind of businessy. Okay. You need your GMAT for, oh, you want a PhD and you need the GMAT. Cool, very nice. Yeah, this is a businessy kind of question here. But JDP asked, does licensing as a strategy to generate added revenues, is that an example of attacking the premise? I don't think so, because the conclusion of this is not licensing will generate added revenues. The conclusion is that we won't endanger our other revenues by licensing. And for the moment, that's all I care about. I don't care about licensing revenues, actually, not in this particular argument. I care about my other revenues if I license. That's what the conclusion is about. You use the conclusion to pinpoint what the argument's actually arguing. And there are all these other things that in the real world you would also want to think about, but for the purposes of this, we are wondering about the reasoning of this argument precisely. And that's the kind of thing we're curious about in this situation. Okay. So if you have that good thought up front, as Sogan did, you can actually see the answer, and then you can move through the answer choices very quickly. Same thing with reading comp. I know we don't have time to do one today, but if you read a passage and then predict an answer before going to the statements, you've pre-thought, you've locked in what the answer needs to be, then you move through the statements quicker, or the answer choices quicker. You base it from the text, you reread the section that's relevant, you come up with a prediction, you lock in, okay, this is what the answer needs to say. Then you find the answer that says it. You're done. So that is a crash course in pre-thinking. Okay, there's much more you can do with that topic. That was a very fast overview, but it did, I hope, give you some examples of when it's useful and why it's useful, and what a powerful tool it can be actually for speed. It actually seems, it's the kind of thing where you actually move faster by slowing down and thinking. Even though it's like, oh my God, I have to get to the work. No, slow down, think, specify what's going on, then get to the situation, having locked in a good world to think about. So I'll wrap this up here. Check out our upcoming classes at manhattanprep.com/GMAT/classes. Again, you can take the first one for free. Try it out, see what you think, see what you like, see if we can help you in your GMAT goals. I will see you all next time. Have a wonderful week.